It's 12:07. Let's say hi and happy Friday to all of those who are here with us, and we can do some additional intros or as we go into discussion. But because we have so much to talk about today, let me first welcome everyone and say I'm Colleen Ryan. I'm the Consulting Executive Director for the New York State CDFI Coalition, and we are so glad to have you on our All Hands November Zoom. So most of you are CDFI executives, but we often have a couple of special guests, or for people who watch this not in real time, here's what New York State Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs, do in a nutshell. We provide financial services and education for low-income New Yorkers. We leverage federal and private dollars for economic development. We create market-based solutions that provide capital to chronically underserved communities across the state, and we promote responsible alternatives to predatory loans. Since 1995, and for those who are doing the math, that's 30 years, the New York State CDFI Coalition has been the organizer and catalyst for strategic initiatives that help the state's CDFIs and the communities they serve. The coalition provides a collective voice, allowing our members to stay locally focused while delivering impact associated with increased scale. That's one of the reasons we launched these all-hands meetings. During the pandemic, the New York State CDFI Coalition Board started meeting by Zoom once a week at lunchtime. These Friday noon Zooms gave CDFI executives from across the state the chance to compare notes, express frustration, and collaborate on some of the biggest challenges of their careers. One of our members said it's cheaper than therapy, and that seemed to be a rallying cry for us. We thought it would be a good idea to extend this opportunity to our members and convene meetings where we could share business updates, celebrate milestones, and give everyone a chance to ask questions. Believe it or not, we will begin our 5th season of All Hands programming in 2026. So, as a lead into our presenter, I want to remind you of an effort that we're ramping up. Over the last couple of months, I've been reaching out to CDFIs across New York State for stories that illustrate the value of our work to help make the case for funding. Guest columns, letters to the editor, and favorable articles in regional press outlets are part of our statewide strategy to shine a light on our member CDFIs and the local businesses they support. We are focusing first on media markets in congressional districts represented by Republicans, as they are the ones in power right now, and hope to call them out for praise or shame based on whether they added their names to a sign-on letter. I'm going to mute whoever's open there. Whether they shared their names to a sign-on letter submitted a couple of weeks ago calling on the U.S. Treasury to continue support of the federal CDFI Fund. So to date, we're just getting started. We've placed articles in the Hudson Valley and in the North Country, with Rochester next on the list. Your hashtag CDFI story could be next. So drop me an email, and as the articles are published, I'll be collecting them on our website as a resource that we can refer back to. So this effort is in response to the fact that the CDFI Fund and the CDFI Movement has been under direct attack since March of 2025. But as Saul Alinsky said in Rules for Radicals, the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. So turning the challenges faced by CDFIs into opportunities to advocate was my inspiration for inviting Alison Feighan, principal of the Feighan Team, to join us for our November All Hands Zoom. The Feighan Team is a woman-owned government relations firm. They empower community development organizations, nonprofit institutions, and coalitions by providing tactical policy advice, legislative guidance, and advocacy tools. I've asked Alison to share some pro tips on how we can make sure more decision makers know about the vital role of CDFIs. Please join me in welcoming Alison Feighan. Alison, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you for pronouncing my name correctly and even caring. So
we make an effort. So.
I appreciate that. Well, pleased that I know many of you on the call, and I've worked with a number of you over the many years that I've been in this space. So good to see everyone, and an impressive cross-section of folks that you have here too, in terms of CDFI banks, loan funds, etc. Let me back. I mean, I know many of you are plugged into other New Markets Coalition, CDFI Coalition, OFN, so don't want to repeat what you are already getting from those sources. But as you know, government is reopened for the most part through January 30th. A few of the federal agencies, including Ag, got full year funding in this last CR. But Treasury, SBA, the majority of the federal programs, all the programs under Health and Human Services are funded through January 30th, which is about 11 weeks. And that includes holidays where Congress will not be working. Staff will probably be working, but it's a very short time period. And I will say I am hopeful, but I think there is also, a chance that we could see another shutdown if they do not come to agreement on both healthcare and some of the other issues that are popping up. So I think the ongoing advocacy campaign to not just promote the importance of CDFIs, but I think really to talk about the local work that is being done. So is really critical, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I think Colleen invited me because I was at an OFN conference and sort of started with talking about it's very easy to get pulled into the negativity and the attacks of what's been happening over the last 9 months, but also important to see what's happening as an opportunity to retool our industry and refresh some of our messaging. I've been in this space. I know I look incredibly youthful, but have been doing this work for like 35 years. So I often think back to when Newt Gingrich took that revolution, where many community development groups were really caught off balance. There was more work in Congress to do bipartisan efforts. There was much more of a feeling on the Hill that Republicans and Democrats were speaking to each other. The tone in Congress was very different. And yet, I don't think that in this industry we had done enough to build up our alliances with Republican members of Congress. And I have always believed that whether you're talking about CDFIs or education issues, one of the things you want to avoid is becoming a partisan issue. There is no reason that supporting small businesses, access to capital, community development should be seen as a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. I don't care who's in charge in the White House or Congress. As an industry, we really need to always be conscious to not allow ourselves to get pigeonholed in that, because truly it is not a partisan issue. So I think sometimes these crises can remind us how important it is to tell our story in a way that is very local, and is where members are going to be back home in the grocery store running into folks who are going to have an opinion about what's happening and are going to have direct impacts. So let me identify some of the challenges that we all know, and I will sort of talk about, I do a lot of work with SBA as well as Treasury Department and CDFI Fund. I think obviously one of the challenges we continuing to face is new leadership in the administration, who are really controlling some of the narrative on Capitol Hill. I've seen the importance of trying to educate both members within the administration, and I think that's tougher right now because I think OMB is really driving the narrative of all federal agencies. I see this at HHS, I see this at Treasury, I see you've got political leaders who are really being driven by the White House and budget issues. So I think the best way to counter that really has been to educate our members of Congress. I'm sorry, was I using Office of Management and Budget at the White House? The folks who actually create the federal budget. I think as community development organizations, you obviously have the direct link with your members of Congress in the Senate and the House, both with their DC staff and with their district staff. I know I'm preaching to the choir because many of you on this call, I know, are really engaged and plugged in to those members. But I think to really break it down to not just using some of the national numbers about how CDFIs for every dollar leverage $12 or $8, but really to talk about how your organization is specifically leveraging those dollars, to really bring it down to local stories. And I also think for members to talk about the real versus the perceived risk of what CDFIs do. I think there's been such a misunderstanding, whether it's intentional or unintentional, that CDFIs don't do underwriting, that they're not serious lenders, that they're nonprofit giveaway programs, that they're DEI driven, that, there's just folks will stick labels on an industry that unless we proactively push back and say, no, this is what we do, and we serve unbanked or unbankable businesses. And yes, many of them are businesses that are owned by people of color, but we are targeting them because they lack access to capital. That is the story.
Alison, can I just jump in and amplify one of the things that you said earlier about using these local stories? And I think we put too much emphasis on Hill visits, on going to Washington, D.C. and seeing these members and their staff in district. I think what you said about running into somebody at the grocery store or at the holiday reception or at the fundraiser for, another nonprofit that you support and they support, that's where you can really tell these stories effectively because you've got their attention.
Right. Or stalking them. No, I'm just
that
kidding.
also works. I'm a proponent. So yeah, all for stalking.
No, I think it's the local stories. I also think it's one of the silver linings that came out of COVID for me was doing these remote meetings. So we use it as Zoom, like you are here. I try to encourage my clients. It saves them a plane ticket to do meetings with congressional staff, and you can actually invite a business owner, a bank partner, all to be on screen with you to meet with that congressional staffer. Those are really impactful meetings. And you actually have the business sitting there in their mechanics, or the ice cream manufacturer. It brings them into that space. And it's economical. I mean, not everyone should have to fly out to DC. So I think that's really powerful. And there are ways to make those scripts, because I do think in this environment, having a banker talk about the very real, and I think community banks, there is this perception that, a lot of Republicans want to support community banks. I personally, I'm always struggling with what's the definition of a community bank. Basically, it's a CDFI. What members of Congress think of as community banks several years ago are now the role that CDFIs are playing. So to have one of your bank partners in a meeting or on a call with a member saying, it's not just that I work with this CDFI, I rely on the CDFI because there are businesses that come in that don't have the collateral, that don't have the cash flow, that are startups. I can't finance these businesses, but it's a viable business. And I want to be able to call the CDFI to say, can you work with this business? And eventually they will become a bank. The goal is to make them bankable. I do a lot of work with the SBA Community Advantage program, and that is like the core message is that CA lenders are reaching out to businesses that are viable, but as the credit box shrinks with conventional financing, they just aren't bankable. And you can either watch them go out and become captured by a predatory lender, or you can step in and try to work with them until they are bankable. And that's a really powerful story that, frankly, resonates with Democrats and Republicans. So I think it's telling the stories, but also thinking about different voices that can amplify your story. And it doesn't just have to be the CDFI itself. I think businesses, partners, elected officials. And to, again, I think having that array that keeps us from being pigeonholed as a Democratic or a Republican initiative is really important. And I think increasingly telling the local story about not just the work that you do, but why you do it. So I think that the credit gap is you can talk as specifically as you can from a local perspective. You know, if you're a startup business seeking 150,000, what are your options in Rochester? What are your options? They just need to hear the real-time story there.
One of the stories that, that I'm using kind of as a lead-in when we do social media posts about these stories that we're placing in papers is, when a startup business walks into a bank and they're looking for 2 years of bank records, it's like when you go in for your first job and they're asking you for 2 years of experience.
Yeah.
It's just like, how does that work? How does that math? And it doesn't. And to say that CDFIs can manage that risk a little better, are willing to look at, as you said, the viability of the business, the potential of the business, not just the quote unquote bankability of the business.
Yeah. But I do think there's that, I will say that the SBA, when you've got folks at the SBA who traditionally, the SBA is a risk adverse federal agency, they just are. And so the folks who are looking at a loan portfolio, a CDFI's loan portfolio, and you've got these folks in the credit risk management office of SBA looking and thinking, 43% startups? This is insane. How does the CDFI explain how they are able to lend to startup businesses, not with a 0% default rate? I mean, you're taking risks, but with a success rate that is probably going to be higher than traditional banks because you are working with us. So to be able to explain our portfolio looks like this, and this is how we manage to be successful. And I spoke a little bit about, trying to take on that perceived risk of CDFIs. I think this is less relevant with the CDFI Fund because they obviously understand the industry. But I think with an agency like the SBA and maybe USDA to some extent, the notion that there are these entities that specifically, like, what are these risky loans or are these less profitable loans? Are these loans that banks can't make because they're going to be less profitable? And it's not damning the banks for that. It's just the reality. A bank answers to their shareholders. Is it a risk issue or is it a profitability issue or is it both? And to again sort of drive home what the CDFI does and how the big picture of what you do, and then examples of how that translates into a business success story.
Does anybody have
I feel like I'm
questions
preaching to folks who know this more
Well,
than, yeah.
I think part of why we need to have this conversation is because we all get caught up in the work, that we're doing and forget the storytelling part. Or,
Right.
we have particular, metrics that we need to share, to prove different things for our funders or what have you. And it's this, storytelling that I think it's something that should be much more natural to us.
Yeah.
So I think, to the extent that you can help move us in that direction,
Yeah.
Is good. If anybody has questions, please, I'm sure Alison won't mind if you jump in. I don't think you'll derail her. So, but we'll let her preach a little more.
I will also just say, I don't think there's for folks, and again, I think for those of you I know on this call, I don't think there is this perception that there's a secret sauce of advocacy or that, folks in DC, there's some magical work that's being done by members of Congress. It's all about local. It's all local. It is all local. And so you've got, I think, Republican members in this environment, especially in the House. That letter was really impressive. That I was surprised that so many people signed on to the letter, and it was great. I think you also have some Republican members who understand how harmful some of the cuts are going to be to their constituents in their districts. They may not want to be public about it. They're going to want to help you, but they may want to help you in a very quiet, behind the scenes manner. I know in some of the immigration work that I have done, well, it's not even immigration, it's deportation, the anti-deportation work. We've got members who are helping us, but it's like, Alison, don't give us an award. Don't send us a thank you note. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to talk to the administration. We're going to help you. But there is so much fear associated with pushing back on the administration that they're doing it in a very covert way. So from my perspective, I am glad that there are groups out there shaking their fists and being very visible and pushing back against this administration. My role, I think, in the work that I do is much more just like keeping folks operating through this period, and whether it's doing it behind the scenes quietly, if that's what's going to keep an organization afloat and able to provide services, then that's what we do.
Alison, can you expand a little bit on, or do you have any statistics on, because you know that this is where you and I first met, was around the Small Business Truth in Lending Act in New York State and predatory lenders and how they really kind of exploited the COVID crisis to prey on businesses that were really struggling. Can you talk a little bit, expand a little bit more on the role of CDFIs when it comes to helping small businesses not fall into that trap?
Well, I think they're like the one backdrop to there. As I said, I think if we can get banks to talk about if they did not have an opportunity to refer a business, I mean, I focus more on small business than housing, so I'm sorry for that. Just admit that angle. If they did not have a CDFI to refer the business to, they would rather say not yet than no. They say not yet, and there's a CDFI they can refer the business to, great. Many of the banks know if not for a bank loan or a CDFI, that the alternative is a high-priced immediate loan. I think SBA understands that. They also they are now not allowing that SBA loans can't be used to refinance MCA debt, which is something we're pushing back on. I think we're reluctant to do that because so many CDFIs and others who have refinanced MCI debt end up losing. I mean, the loans, they're taking on a risk.
Can you, for those people who aren't doing small business lending, just quickly tell folks what an MCA loan is?
Merchant cash advance. It's when you're basically, they're structured in all different ways, but they are basically loans that are set up where a lender will take funds from your account on a regular basis, no matter what your cash flow is. I should say, but I think generally the notion that an unregulated lender who has high-priced loans, CDFIs, are in fact regulated, mission-driven. So I think there's an understanding, I think in rural areas, I guess I should also have stressed this, I think the three types of stories that, again, this is SBA, loans to veteran-owned businesses, loans to rural businesses, and loans to manufacturing are particularly impactful at this point, and I would probably reorder that to lead with manufacturing. And I really encourage folks who are making small loans to urban. I think we've been doing a lot of work in educating folks in the administration what all along the supply chain, that you've got manufacturers, they're not all Ford Motor Company. They're all not businesses that need 10 million. In fact, community advantage lenders have made more loans to manufacturing businesses than 7A. So I think if you've got stories of manufacturing, again, whether it's a brewery or ice cream manufacturer or tool and die company that needed a piece of equipment, wasn't able to qualify for a loan. That's a really impactful story, and members of Congress need to understand that.
I just saw Yankee pop up, and
Yes,
actually
yes, I
I was
was
going to call
listening. I'm
on you.
sorry, we were having also our, weekly staff meeting, so I'm popping in and out, and I apologize. I
But
didn't.
I wanted to call on you, Yankee,
So
specifically
we have
about.
four,
Okay.
as Alison knows, we have four clients who, in some way, it's not like the biggest factory in the US, but
Yeah.
ice cream maker, someone who makes pot pies, someone who actually purchased a business from his boss. They, supply glass, so there's some manufacturing involved. And then someone who creates this, it's called Night Watch Thermal and it's very, they actually sell to the Canadian what do you call them? The
Mounties?
Mounties, yeah. It's
I live upstate, I just know that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just so you know, Alison, we just shared that with Chris Webb.
No, and those are great. And I've shared your stories on the Hill too, which is great. I should say, and Yankee, you made me think of it, the fact that, there are these new SBA rules in terms of making sure that not just the business you lend to is documented, but all their employers. Do we have an answer to that problem? No. Is it a hugely troubling requirement that they have and how they're implementing it? Yes. And I think the fact that even when we were talking about your manufacturing businesses, being careful not to shine a light on those businesses, that the SBA will.
Exactly. And we've been very careful about that,
I know.
especially, we ourselves, we are very careful about how we explain what we do, so we don't get into trouble for DEI or, whatever's perceived as being un-American.
Yankee, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but when we're talking about the size and the scale of some of this lending, you've told a wonderful story in the past about your flower vendor who comes to you around Valentine's Day, I think, to purchase roses. Could you share that with everyone?
Yeah, unfortunately, he stopped coming because.
Oh no! Is he bankable now?
No. So anyway, I don't want to make you guys, I'm sure you're curious. So, and I don't want to take time away from Alison and others, because I know Alison is the main speaker here. So, when I explain what we do, I kind of explain the range of loans we make at a company capital. It's from, 500, used to be 500, but the minimum is now 1,000, and we go up to 350. But we did have a strategic planning session yesterday. It's part of a series of discussions, and the staff want us to go up to 500,000, just so you know, Alison.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So and people are like, well, what can you do with $500? So I always share this example that Colleen is referring to. So we have someone who sells flowers on Valentine's Day. So a week before Valentine's Day, he would come and he'd borrow $500 and he'd buy inventory of roses, and he actually sells them on the street. And then he comes a few weeks later, he repays us, and he would come back every year. But one year, what happened is the Street Vendors Project asked if they could interview him, and I felt a little uncomfortable, but then I said, okay. And then when we asked him if he can be interviewed, after he repaid the loan, he never came back. So, so now we're very careful.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone gets a little nervous and anxious, given the whatever.
Yankee, I would be interested. What was the conversation that took place when you decided to increase the loan to 500?
Because we have clients we've made, and we don't make the largest loans. There's some of you here who make very large loans. We go up to 350, but there's some clients who are saying, we need up to 500,000, given that the cost of everything has gone up. And these are clients that have potential to grow. And they've also requested, Alison, a lot of very specialized technical assistance. What they've said, and we agree, some of the assistance we give is meant for really small startups, and we don't have the internal capacity to really mentor and coach. We did hire someone, but it was very expensive, just as a consultant. And they also want to build up skills, like technical skills in the sector they work in, if it's in construction, and they want to do more networking. among
Okay.
similar business. But this request, we are seriously considering,
And is it
increasing.
also that you've seen banks increasing the what they define as a small loan that they won't do, or is it more on the okay?
And that's, I'm sure there are others here who are
Yeah.
more familiar with that. I wouldn't be able to answer that in a,
Yeah.
knowledgeable manner.
Because I think it's just
The
as
only
important
thing I
telling
can
this.
add to that is
Yeah.
that we're in New York City, and maybe a bunch of years ago, $500 could go certain distance, but now that's more like $1,000. It's really the same as what $500 used to be.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the 500,000. I think in addition to telling the story about what CDFIs do, it's telling the story about why. Like, what is the gap that you're filling? And that's going to be, I mean, I know I'm speaking to folks in New York, but it may be a different story if you're working in Rochester or Geneva or Manhattan in terms of that gap. And I think that's as important to talk about. We're doing this because this is the gap, and this is maybe how it's changed over the last year or 2 years or whatever. It's not like a static. I mean, we've got, the fact that the SBA microloan is 50,000. Well, what if you need 55,000? You're sort of there's just like no man's land. And so I just think it's important to. And I just learned so much hearing folks talk about what it is that their banks are doing locally, or consolidation, or there isn't a bank in this rural area, or, that's
So
an important piece.
this is actually the time I'm looking at, it's 20 minutes to 1. And this is actually the time that I was hoping that people would start some back and forth conversations. So not to put the spotlight on Yankee, but I would definitely encourage anyone who has questions or thoughts or stories to share to jump in now. And I'm especially looking at 2 of our non-CDFI people who might have observations to make. Jacinta Chen, who is working with U.S. Senator Gillibrand, and Babby Jacobs, who is works with impact investors. So if either of you have anything to add to this conversation, from kind of the outside, that's great. But any of our member CDFIs, thoughts on this, questions?
Yeah, I would love to hear from Alison. I haven't had a chance to connect with her recently, but I know they've been doing a lot of work advocating for small businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to add.
I
to-
meant, sorry, Alison,
Yeah.
Lindsay.
Oh,
was
okay.
gonna say.
Sorry.
A little related question here. When you were talking about everything's local and the importance of everything we're talking about here, which is amazing, a question came up in my mind because we did go to Washington and meet with representatives, but they tended to be the Democrats, and they were saying, you're not talking to the right people, you don't need to talk to us. And I'm just curious about your opinion about that.
Well, I think it's I think it's important to speak with both sides all the time, and I take issue with anyone who say, well, so we can't talk to Democrats, or we don't talk to Republicans, we only talk to Democrats. Or if you can't, and unless they're speaking another language, you should be able to speak with both sides, and you should speak with both sides. I think the messaging might be a little bit different, but I don't think we can afford to give up on deepening the commitment of what's happening on the Democratic side. So I think you need to meet with both. I think in this environment, asking a Democrat to write a letter or to do something big and proactive is not going to be well received, but I think you need to keep working with them.
The other way to look at it, I think, is, because of the power dynamic, if you are asking Republicans to do something, they have the potential because they have juice. But if you're speaking with your Democrats, you're kind of giving them cover. You're encouraging them to continue and to, and shoring up what they already know, giving them more ammunition, if you will. So let's, if we can, call on Lindsay and see what she has to add to the conversation.
Let me just actually
Go
say
ahead.
one more thing. I think also to ask Democrats, who are some of the Republicans that you would encourage us to talk to,
Yes.
right? Because things could flip, in November.
Anytime, really.
But I do think that some Democrats will, say, who are some of the Republicans that you work with or that you would encourage us to talk to? That's a really good question to ask.
And especially in New York State, because most of the Republican, group members in New York State are not like super radical, rabid, MAGA people. So they are perhaps persuadable. So there are people, who are in that position in New York State that we should be reaching out to. So go, Lindsay.
Alison, thank you so much for this overview. I think something you said that we've been talking about as small business majority, I feel like since the beginning of our organization, is this nature of making small businesses this tokenized entity of one party or another. And it's so important that that doesn't exist. So even in the context of, if a Democrat is like, no, go talk to Republicans about this issue, it continues to deepen this idea that small business lending, entrepreneurship, etc., belongs to one party or another. And so I think something we've been toying around for years is, how do we get both parties to acknowledge small businesses as the key stakeholder to any community, regardless of party? And this is more important now than ever before. I think as you are talking to one party or another, one elected official or another, I think you can use small business lending as this ever fluid tool to speak to this party or this elected official and what they care about. Do they care about justice-backed individuals? Amazing. Do they care about community safety? Like, how can you frame small business lending? Because it does fit into almost every single thing, just as entrepreneurship does. If you ever have any questions, there's so many experts on this team, but this is what we've been trying to do in house as all these cuts have been made to the SBA as small business majority. We've been really trying to figure out, how do we frame these issues not in a way that's false, but in a way that really resonates with these key stakeholders, and even the ones who aren't quote unquote decision makers. Because like Alison and Colleen say, like, tides could switch anytime, any moment. And just because one person is saying like, oh, that's not my issue, doesn't mean it shouldn't be. There's a through line to every single issue. And I always like to say, when I first started off in my job, I really cared about immigrant rights, healthcare, childcare. And I didn't think I was made for a small business majority or being a small business advocate. And I had an amazing mentor saying the through line to all those issues is entrepreneurship. And you expand it to any conservative, if you're talking about economic resilience or independence, small business ownership. And that doesn't happen without small business lending. So I think being really creative with how you frame it to someone is really crucial.
And I think the more you can give, is it small business or is it access to capital? So I think an access to capital is sort of I don't know that phrase resonates with everybody, which again is why I think if you tell it, you're working in a rural community, if you can talk about how many banks are based there, what's consolidation ahead, why being able to access capital is so critical. And I think that's the piece that folks can. Small business used to be much more bipartisan. It's sort of sad. So it used to be sort of the love fest going to some of those small business committees. And now I think, unfortunately, even members of those committees are seeing it as an opportunity to, to just make it a politicized discussion. So, but Lindsay, I work a lot with the small business majority team in DC. So you've got a great crowd.
And just to state the obvious, the acronym CDFI isn't doing us any favors. You've got a lot of explaining to do the minute you walk into an office before you even get to the crux of the issue. Mission-driven lending, maybe, but then does that sound too woke? So I think we need to work together on, finding a better shorthand for what it is that we do. And, maybe that's something that we can put some additional kind of deep thought into.
And I think I've been doing this like little roadshow across New York in partnership. If anyone wants to partner, let me know. In partnership with a bunch of local organizations. Shout out to Yankee because AC is partnering with us. But something I realized is even in these like local rural areas of the state, I ask about CDFI lending and they're like, what's that? And I bring up a lender and they're like, oh, we love them. But like even when I talk about CDFI cuts, they're like, that doesn't affect my community. But I'm like, well, what about this group? And they're like, oh, I didn't know what a CDFI is. And so even folks who are like, CEOs of chambers or folks who are so integrated into the community and work with you as a CDFI might not even know that you are a quote unquote CDFI.
Yeah.
I don't know, but we're getting on towards 1 o'clock. I know people are going to have to bounce because everybody's got really busy schedules. But does Aisha, do you have anything to add from the nonprofit point of view, or from Aisha, who wears many hats with NFF and OFN and so if anybody else has anything to add, then we can start with Aisha for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to double down on some of the points that Alison made in the beginning. And hi, Alison. When I started out in the New Market Tax Credit world, you were with Raposa and Associates, so feel like it's just good to reconnect. But that while CDFIs and the work that we do have bipartisan, bicameral support, there has not been enough focus, over the decades on really building and strengthening relationships with Republican representatives. And that's really where the focus is right now. And the focus is on changing the hearts and minds of folks at OMB. And so how do we do that? The ordinary citizen, the average, even us as practitioners, we really can't get directly to OMB. And so, having champions and having Republican lobbyists right now, I think they're just two important things that we should all be seeking. And like, I understand what Nancy was saying too. I remember when I first started going on the Hill with different coalitions, I often didn't get invited to a lot of the pre-scheduled visits because the rationale was you're in New York and everybody, all of your elected officials are already supportive. We need to get to the folks who are not. But I disagree with that. And I think that we should always be in front of our representatives with our stories. Definitely, we have to spend time thinking about storytelling and how we connect both the data and the more qualitative, pieces of, the work that we do and how we get that in front of people who have a vote and then also have influence that may influence, folks in OMB. So do some research. Who used to work with Treasury, like who used to work with Mike Calabria, who used to work with Russell Vought, who worked with these people, and see if we can get in front of them. So that's just some, my perspective and some learnings that I have. I do think it's tougher for some of us because we may not be in rural communities. We may not do manufacturing. My organization serves nonprofits. We do have some overlay in rural, might be worth it for us to have a more rural strategy. But if we're not naturally focused there, we don't do, manufacturing, what can we bring that will spark some level of investment, in those that have a vote to say, I care about those issues too. I think that's also something that could be helpful for us to really think through together and get some strategies around that.
Yeah, and I think again, I used to just talk about so you don't do rural or manufacturing, but you exist because you are filling a gap. So what is that gap? And I think there's some, like I've been at, well, how do we get to Stephen Miller? And I'm like,
You don't.
you don't. But but that doesn't mean you give up. So I think the fact I appreciate what you're saying is that there are different ways to think outside the box. And I think the members, unlike members of the administration, again, there's this accountability that you go home and you're going to be, maybe senators are more protected, but you go home and you're going to hear from constituents who are impacted. And I also think, again, I understand there are Republican and Democratic lobbyists, yes, but there's also, these are elected officials. I will talk to a Democrat, I will talk to a Republican. I may tweak the language, but we all have to, and I just think these institutions, we have access to all these folks, and I think we need to take advantage of that. And and again, maybe just figure out how you change the message or who you go into the meeting with, but you should be in those meetings. Everyone, like whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, you should be in those meetings and part of that conversation. And not leave it to folks like me. I mean, I often see myself as just a facilitator. You guys need to be the ones having the conversation. I can be supporting you in the background, but they need to hear from you.
Mhm.
So
again, being mindful of the time and respectful of all of your time, I just want to say what a thought-provoking conversation and what a wealth of knowledge and expertise we have on this call right now. This is really, I hope, been an eye-opener for a lot of you, or at least giving you some direction on what we should be thinking about going forward into 2026. So based on what Alison has just told us, are you ready to rally for CDFIs, to call for adequate funding, and to push back on cuts to allied programs that serve the same populations we do? I will be continuing to reach out for our CDFI stories to help policymakers and interest groups and elected officials grasp the broad mission of CDFIs to promote financial inclusion, economic security, and wealth building opportunities in underserved communities across New York State. My plug that I'm obligated to give is, if you haven't already done so, please join the coalition or renew your membership. We rely on your membership to make all of these efforts possible. And I just want you to know that we are all here together to support the vital efforts of CDFIs across New York State. So we can continue. We have another 5 minutes, but I needed to get my plug in before people started to bail out. So anybody else have anything to say, share, question? I want to thank Alison so much for being here. She was one of the last, a member of one of the last panels at the OFN conference. And I was like, dang, I looked around and I thought so many people could have benefited from this conversation. And it was just, somebody's got to be the last presenter, but I had wished it wasn't Alison. So
much to talk about. Yeah.
I'm happy that she could join us today.
Thank you. It's a good way to end a week with you guys.
Please share this recording. It's just amazing, this meeting. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Anybody else? All right. Well, then carry on.
Thank you for organizing, Colleen, and thank you, Alison, and thank you, Lindsay, for advocating on our behalf.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You guys are the best. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Stay safe.
Take care.